I just want to thank my colleagues, Keetha Mercer and Paulette Senior, for joining me today. I will actually let both of them chime in and give a little bit of an introduction about who they are. So we're going to start with Paulette Senior, who is down on the square on the bottom right.
Thank you so much. Good to know where I'm located in the screen and in the square. It's quite a time that we're living in. My name is Paulette Senior. I'm President and CEO of the Canadian Women's Foundation. Pleased to be here. I hope everyone is staying safe and well. And for those who are, know someone or have someone in their families who have been struck by the virus, I wish them speedy and healthy recovery, and that together we can get through this. Thank you for doing this event today.
And I'm going to pass it to Keetha Mercer.
Hi everyone, I'm Keetha Mercer. I am Director of Community Initiatives and Grants at the Foundation, working from my bedroom in Toronto, and really happy to be here today and share a little bit about the work that's been happening throughout the country and the impacts of the pandemic on women and girls everywhere. So just want to say a big shout out to all the community organizations who are going above and beyond during this time and all the time. So happy to be here and talk a bit about it.
Great. So without further ado, my name is Andrea Gunraj. I didn't even introduce myself. And I am also a colleague of Paulette's and Keetha's at the Canadian Women's Foundation. I do public engagement, and it's really a pleasure to be able to speak to some of these impacts. I feel many of the gendered impacts of COVID-19 right now are quite hidden. And now people are starting to talk about things like changes and increases in gender-based violence, economic instabilities for communities and particularly women, girls, and trans and non-binary folks, and what we need to do in our communities to make a difference, to get to these hidden impacts, to make sure nobody's left behind. And we've, of course, heard a lot about the healthcare system, flattening the curve, and public health. But I'm hoping that this discussion will get us into other areas that maybe we haven't heard as much about in the media. And some of the things that, of course, our grantees and our program partners all across the country are doing to make a difference. So with that, I'm going to ask a question of Keetha. Keetha, since you've been doing so much conversations in the community with organizations and service providers, love to ask you about, since the isolation measures came into effect, what are frontline organizations telling you about what they're experiencing, particularly the challenges, but maybe some glimmers of hope as well too, because as you said, people are resilient and doing really interesting things right
now. Yeah, I've been chatting with organizations throughout the country for the past 3-4 weeks now, and I'm hearing all sorts of stories about how they're adapting, the communities, and the impacts of the shutdown and social isolation on them and their organizations, staff, and clients and people who access their services. Some of the big ones are, I know we've heard a lot about increases in gender-based violence and calls for support, which is always challenging in a social isolation situation. Lots of organizations are talking about the struggle to find confidential spaces for people to call and talk, even if they aren't living in a violent household at this point. Having a chance to be finding a space separate from your kids, separate from your family members, to talk to a counselor and continue your healing journey is always complicated. Lots of organizations are talking about the increased food insecurity. So kids who are getting meals at schools or in community kitchens, that kind of thing. Even food banks can no longer do that. So we're seeing lots of organizations adapt and try and provide food for the communities they work with or increase the food they're giving. So I spoke to one organization who's giving over 900 meals a day out to their community. And this is money that they don't necessarily have in their budget and don't necessarily have funders for, but they're working hard to be able to address that insecurity. Also, this increase in online life is great for those of us that have good internet service, who have phone minutes, who have technology in their homes, and not great for people who don't. So lots of organizations are adapting and moving to online programming and connecting with the youth, women, and children that they've been working with. But many are trying to figure out how to still reach out to people that they're working with who don't have that kind of access. So, some organizations have been buying tablets, some have been paying phone plans or buying minutes for their clients, and some are, using volunteers to drive and drop off kits at people's homes to participate in programming. One thing we've seen a lot of in this isolation time is that the vulnerabilities and the divides in terms of like poverty and access have been greatly increased. With kids doing school online, that works well when you have a tablet or a phone or a computer for each person in your house. But when you have people trying to work from home and kids trying to access school at home, and you only have one computer or not enough for everybody, that's really difficult. So you're seeing people having to figure it out as they go. And social isolation, as we've already been talking about, is really significant for lots of folks, including young people who are cut off from their friends, from their communities, from their programs. We've definitely been talking to organizations that work with youth who are in care, and a lot of those facilities are getting shut down or locked down. So young people in group homes can't have their families come in and visit them. They're trying to get technology into the group homes so that young people don't feel like they are in prison when they are not. So there's the waves of impacts are vast. And that's just what's happening now. Lots of organizations are talking about what will happen when the social isolation is over and things like family courts open up again and have to start dealing with a massive backlog.
Thank you so much, Keetha. I have a follow-up question. Those isolation measures that you speak to, are you hearing anything specifically about rural and remote? I know the tech gap is going to be big in the more remote communities, but other kind of issues that you're seeing around that, given the location, Canada is huge. So different people are going to see different things in those different communities. Let us know any thoughts around that.
Yeah, I mean, the personal protective equipment is really difficult in rural and remote communities. I mean, there's a big strain on everyone, healthcare providers and all organizations. So I was speaking to an organization a couple weeks ago that had to respond to a crisis outside of the doors of their office without any protective gear, but decided to do it anyway because this is their community and their commitment to it. I think that when we were talking about any kind of transportation and accessing healthcare services is already complicated in rural communities for folks that are struggling to get into town on an everyday basis. And now when we're talking about not being able to call in, phone lines being busy, and no regular transportation services happening, that's even more difficult. Technology, as you said, Andrea, is a concern. I struggle with my internet in Toronto, keeping up with this working from home. Imagine in a space with less infrastructure. So, as I said, the social and economic divides that exist already in the country are just further exacerbated by this situation.
Thank you so much. I'm going to pick on Paulette now, if you don't mind. So, the Canadian Women's Foundation, given our role to support women and girls all across the country, and particularly service providers who are on the front lines right now, I think it's really important for us to be supporting them. And I think that we've just been doing our best to cull information and find out what's going on. Can you give me a sense of other things that the foundation is doing right now to try to address these things?
Well, thank you, Andrea. And Keetha, as you spoke, my heart sort of breaks as I try to imagine what it's like for many of the women and families that we support through our granting and through the work that our grantees do, what that kind of situations that they're experiencing is like, particularly being isolated with a potential abuser, whether you're a young person or a woman or a gender non-binary person. That must be an awful experience. And so, for us at the foundation, we've had to adjust to the demands of the time. And I think all organizations, our grantees and others, have had to do the same. And so it's important for us to understand what's happening on the ground, as you shared, Keetha, from the responses that we've received, and to then listen and see what it is that we have the power and influence to do. So one of the major things that's been occupying most of my time is to work with government to really push on what we know the needs are in communities, on top of what the needs were already. But what's happening in terms of what are those sort of collective needs that our grantees and other organizations are having to face. Make sure that the government recognizes this as they determine the level of supports that are needed and where resources should be spent, that our sector is not forgotten in these critical conversations. And also to bring forward some of the solutions, or at least temporary solutions that we think are critical to government. So we were part of discussions and eventual success in being able to garner funds for the sector. And so working with other community organizations like Women's Shelters Canada and others, we as the Canadian Women's Foundation were able to distribute funds geared towards the sexual assault centers throughout the country. So that's an important achievement. There are other organizations that don't fall within those two areas of work, but are still doing that front-facing critical work. That's important to support as well. So we are continuing to work with the government to get those funds out. So that's important. We've had to pause on some aspects of our work, but then sort of step up in other ways. So one of the things that we've launched is the Tireless Together Fund to raise awareness, bring attention to the need for these critical funds. There are people out there who are looking to help and don't know where to help, especially if they have to be isolated at home, but they could give funds to help organizations that are providing essential services in their communities to protect vulnerable women and young people and gender non-binary people. So it's really important that we've been able to pivot in this way and to be able to do that work, and that will have to continue, because what I'm concerned about, as we rightly need to respond to this crisis that's taking over the work that we're doing, that we also taking over our lives and impacting lives in ways we still yet have to uncover. We still have to also think about the aftermath. And so I think at this time, with our voices raised collectively with other partners and collaborators out there, we have a government that's responding to this need by making sure that dollars are being directed to the sector. And so we can't ease up off of that at this moment. It's important to continue and to also think through in terms of the aftermath. So the response is important, but we need to also think of the aftermath as well.
Thank you so much, Paulette. Really appreciate that overview. Really exciting to, even in this difficult time, hear that there's so many people doing good work in communities, and that there's support on the level of folks like us who are helping with funding, and from the government as well too. I want to address a question here that was posted. Somebody asking about anyone compiling national data on gender violence. It's a great question. I am not aware at the minute of anybody who is doing that compilation. What we have seen is hints. We've seen some service providers say they've seen a huge spike. We've heard other service providers say that they actually maybe have seen a bit of a reduction in service requests. And I think it's really important for us to point out that any movement on the different requests for support and reporting is not necessarily an indication of what's going on when it comes to domestic violence, gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, violence at home. We have to remember that there's a real underreporting of this crime and of these issues. And sometimes people might be less safe to access those services and supports. So they may not be able to pick up the phone or text or reach out through social media the way they might have been able to before. So even a decrease can be concerning as much as an increase. And I think we've been seeing kind of a bit of both, a hodgepodge of both. So definitely we're going to keep our eyes out for anybody doing kind of research and studies as the week go on, because I think it's very important, as Paulette mentioned, for us to respond now. But remember that these are going to have reverberations for months to come, maybe even for years to come. We've talked about it in terms of the economy, of course, but I think it also can play out in homes, in violent relationships, in difficulties that women face as the weeks and the months go by. So thank you very much for that question. And we're going to do a bit of a wrap up now. I just want to ask Keetha and Paulette, I want to go on the bright side of things. Keetha, I'll start with you. What are you seeing right now that gives you hope?
Yeah, I think what's giving me the most hope is how committed organizations are to continuing to serve their communities. Despite losses in funding and fundraising, despite layoffs, despite the increased challenges, organizations are so deeply committed to continuing this work and to being in community and good relationship with the people that they work with. It is inspiring to see people still going into work in offices that are closed down to make sure that they can still do confidential crisis calls, putting together backpacks of food and diapers and driving kits all over their communities to make sure that families have some of what they need to get by so that kids have activities in their programs. It's really inspiring. It's always inspiring, but it's impressive and incredible how communities are stepping up to support each other, donating money, donating supplies, volunteering, getting trained for crisis calls. People really want to be able to do something, and it's always inspiring to see how people step up.
Paulette, I'll pass it to you. What gives you hope right now?
Thanks, Andrea. Just to continue from Keetha, I'm impressed with humanity in general. I'm impressed with how we're able to respond and how we show our hearts and our love for each other at this time. I'm impressed with, I just got off a call a few minutes ago where almost a couple hundred organizations and individuals turned up for a meeting to talk about how we could work together and collaborate to share initiatives, to talk about what are the gaps and how we can work on addressing those gaps. Everyone is stepping up in the way they know how, putting forward what they do best, and how we can together actually make sure that we are creating opportunities to build safer environments for folks, that we're recognizing that the most vulnerable are the ones that we need to be protecting to the best of our ability, and that the way we go about that can only be together. Similar to how we're going to actually be able to get out of this pandemic is together, it's also together that we'll be able to protect the most vulnerable among us. And so that to me gives me hope, and I am really, I would say, very pleased to have and honored to be working with some incredible colleagues who have stepped up so much in terms of being able to continue their work, but step up their work in amazing ways in terms of reaching out to our grantees, reaching out to our donors, creating initiatives, not giving up, so really being able to see people's valiant efforts shine, and that we'll be able to really bring some safety to people's lives. Right now, we know that there are thousands, if not more, people living in our country that are at risk. And so my hope is that with the efforts that we're putting in, with their own resiliency, as well in their own communities, and supporting grassroots efforts and organizations, that we'll be able to come out of this okay and be stronger for it, and make sure that what's being shown up now as the weaknesses in our public policies, in our society in general, that we'll be able to shore those up and be prepared as a country, as a society, as communities, for the next time something hits, that we won't have this kind of impact on vulnerable people the way we do now.
Thank you, Paulette. Thank you, Keetha. Two things as we close. I want to remind you about the Tireless Together Fund that Paulette mentioned. That's the Canadian Women's Foundation's COVID-19 Emergency Response Fund. And it's designed to really encourage people to give now in the immediate kind of thick of this pandemic, to make sure that girls and women have the support that they need, but then also to support organizations on the front line as they're going to grapple with this for a while. So it's about the aftermath as well, too, as Paulette has mentioned. Please visit CanadianWomen.org, and whatever you're able to give, every dollar counts. No pressure, obviously. I know people are really pressed right now, but if you have the capacity to give, let me tell you how important this will be for service providers all over the country. So it's a good national-wide response to something that's harming everybody right now and challenging everybody right now. And the second thing I want to also remind you is that just this week, the Canadian Women's Foundation partnered with Juniper Park, shout out to Juniper Park, for a great campaign called Signal for Help. And this is a simple signal anybody can do on a video call to show that they need somebody to safely check in with them if they are experiencing violence or at risk of violence. So just to demonstrate, maybe my colleagues can demonstrate with me, this is the signal for help, okay? So you have your hand out, you pull your thumb in and you trap your thumb. And it's something that somebody can do just digitally on a call that leaves no footprint, and that they can show that the people on the call, I need somebody to check in with me safely. And for those of you who see this signal in a call, remember that you checking with that person safely, you can call them and ask perhaps yes or no questions. You can WhatsApp them, just general stuff, because remember, somebody could be watching their device. Just do whatever you can to check in safely with this person because they need your support. And remember that you can always offer another support service. So the Assaulted Women's Helpline is a great one for those in Ontario. There's Women's Shelters Canada that you can go to their website and find shelters all over the country listed there. Also go to our website. We've listed as many supports as we could find that might be helpful for you. You can go to CanadianWomen.org/signal for help. Just go to our main page and you'll be able to find it there, and make sure that you access those resources so that you have them ahead of time. I always tell people that there's no substitute to being a safe person that other people can come to and say, hey, I need something. That is so powerful. So take that with you as we move forward. Be that safe person. Be that person who flattens the curve and is there for people who need it. And remember that in these times, it's those who are most vulnerable that how we support them shows our bravery, shows our quality as a community. So let's do the best that we can. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.